Dominic, here we are this summer. You know what I love about the summer is everyone is kind of forced a little bit to reflect, ponder, think about. Sometimes in the fall and the spring, it's so busy, you don't have time. Right now, August, you're sitting on the deck, you're having a beer, and I think one of the questions people are asking themselves is when and how to pivot my portfolio. I think that 6 months ago, everyone was running ragged, everyone was busy, everyone was trying to expand and grow. But now there's some people that are really thinking about whether or not they need to pivot, and whether or not they need to change what they're doing. So I guess let's start with you, Dom. Let's just start with sort of a broad brushstrokes in terms of how you have maybe, a quick overview of how you've pivoted, how you've thought about pivoting over the years, running a big REIT, that has lots of different properties across Canada, across Western Canada. So how's that worked out for you?
Well, thanks again for having me on this, JG. What I love about this time, it's actually the best time of the year. It's also, for me, sometimes the worst time of the year. Number one, it's the best time of the year so that you can take some time off and reflect and how the year has been going. And if you need to make any adjustments, that's the time to do it. And that's what I love with being on holidays. The same time with being on holidays is that things don't run as fast and as much and as quickly as you want it to, because you're coming at you're coming off of 100 miles an hour to almost zero. And if I don't see deals in front of me, or we're looking at finding ways to push the company ahead, I feel like I'm losing at the race, right? So, but it's a good time to reflect, and pivoting is one of those things that that vacations and time off gives you time to reflect and saying, do I need to pivot? Do I not? And given where things are at, especially it's so timely to have this conversation given COVID, right? And years ago for us it was the government had changed in a pretty big way here in Alberta, right? And now so how do you pivot there? How do you address that? And there's always going to be times, and you can never be ready, but you could always have to be alert as to what things are changing around you. And the criticality of pivoting, in my opinion, is it shouldn't never be a knee-jerk reaction. There's a few things you've got to look at. And I think, one of the things that we've talked about is it's probably more of an art than it is a science. There's a number of things that will be able to tell you, look, this is an indication of where things are headed. Perhaps you need to pivot and you need to change. And so for us, it was in 2012. That's how long ago it was before I made the decision to roll everything we had built to that point. We were growing and growing fast, but it was then when I started thinking about, maybe I need to start thinking about what my clients, what my investors are looking for. And it always comes down to that. When you're having conversations, you think things are going great. A lot of us are investors. We all have investors with us. We buy properties, it's great. And, just because you're sending a check or a distribution check or things are well, it may not mean that, things are not changing around you. And so having those conversations with your clients, we have the privilege of having more than 270 clients, and so that gives us a good basis of knowing what the majority of people are thinking, where they're headed. And so for us, we got a lot of feedback from them, which drove us to change from what we were doing to the real estate trust.
Now, Dom, pivoting is like you said, it's art and science, which I 100% agree with. It's also often the decision is actually relatively easy, and you typically have the data to back up your pivot. Typically, it's the emotions that make the pivot difficult, isn't it? I mean, it's like, where's that line between tenacity versus insanity of like how long you hang on for? If you're, that's, I think, a question a lot of investors are asking themselves is, man, this isn't working great, but man, do I pivot now? These are the kinds of questions I think people are asking themselves.
Well, I mean, I 100% agree. It's definitely emotional. And once you finally make the decision to actually make the move, is once you've decided, now everything else has to change. You change the direction of the company, you change the direction of your focus, and so on and so forth. But before that is in my opinion, sometimes it's the most difficult time to be both productive and move the company forward. But at the same time, it's absolutely essential if things around you are changing. So one of the questions about how much time do you need before you actually make it? I think a lot of that comes down to doing your research, figuring out who else is in this business that's doing what I'm doing. What is your differentiator? A lot of times we're in the business that we are, and we get very comfortable in what we're doing, especially when the economy is great, and then all of a sudden something changes, and we're not quick enough to react. What's worse about not reacting, or what's worse about making a wrong decision, is not making a decision at all, because you might find yourself trailing behind this movement that occurred 6 months ago, and now you're too late, right? And so I think the worst thing to do is not to do anything at all. And so, and here's the other thing too. One thing I struggle with a lot is, how long do you hang on to a business that perhaps is not going forward as much as it is, right? For us, we spent a lot of time growing the company between 2009 and 2013, 2014. 2015, the market started to change. We had to figure out how to adapt to it. The old model of buying multifamily buildings was working really well, but given the change of the circumstances of the market, a lot more people in the business, it compressed the margins. And so we looked around and said, okay, well, what do our clients need? Our clients need, well, they need a distribution. They need a way to, get out of their investment. They need something a little bit more diversified. And so that drove the decision to move into commercial. It drove our decision to go and acquire in BC, in Saskatchewan, not only in Alberta. And we're already talking about Manitoba, and I've got a call with someone next week about looking out east as well. So you have to know when to pivot, and a lot of that, I think, is also driven by the deficiencies that exist within your business, right? If you ask yourself, okay, how do I make my business better? If you're not thinking about how to make it better, grow it, or anything like that, then you're probably not thinking about pivoting anyways. So that's really what drives a lot of those questions. And going back, and I'm kind of rambling here a little bit, but going back to the question, what if something's not working? How long do you stick it out for? That, again, becomes an art. At some point, you have to decide and make sense of the situation that you're in. Are you able to improve it? If you are, then what steps are required for you to do that, and in how much time? I give myself an amount of time. Hey, in 6 months from now, if I don't see any improvement, we're making a change. I mean,
there's something important there. So I heard a couple of key nuggets. Number one, I heard not making a decision is a decision, and it could be, in fact, the worst decision. So be very aware of, if you're postponing, you're actually making a postponing decision. So don't, be very clear on the decision you're making, because you're always making a decision. I think that's very key. And the second thing you just said, very critical there, is give yourself a timeline. If you're not sure, that's okay. Give yourself a timeline, and by this date, I'm making a decision, I am making a pivot, so on and so forth. I think it's critical. The other thing, though, Dom, that you kind of alluded to, and I think that it needs to be mentioned, is you don't have to pivot everything at once, and you don't have to pivot forever. You can taste and touch and test to see if the pivot's going to make sense without fully pivoting. Like, you run a very successful REIT, right? So you didn't sell all your multifamilies and move completely into industrial like this. It took time. You tested, you tasted, you saw if it worked. You looked at the numbers, you crunched some more data. You figured that was a good approach. And as you got more and more evidence towards that approach, you continue to take more action down that pivot. That, to me, Dom, is really the success. And I think people get emotionally attached to, I'm leaving this thing behind and I'm going in this particular direction, but it doesn't happen in a full swoop like that.
You know what, you're so on point when it comes to, you can just, you don't have to pivot all in. This is not an all in situation, right? So we made the decision to go into commercial, and we started with, one property in Prince George. Then we started with another one here in Calgary, another one in Saskatchewan. And before you know it, you're looking at the results, you're going, well, wait a second, you know what? This is a right decision for us. We're going all in. And so we went full bore in, right? So a year and a half ago, I personally acquired an office building in Calgary. Probably the worst market to be in terms of office. But I know that at some point, someone is going to come up with a solution for these offices here. And I knew nothing about it. But I know at some point that market is going to return. And we'll talk a little bit about office and COVID and all that a little bit later. But I wanted to understand where this is going. And I wanted to understand who the players are. What do I need to know about office? What are some of the challenges that are out there? Not just the obvious one, but what other ways? How can I differentiate myself to still fill the office spaces that are there? We recognize what the issues are. I just got to figure out the solution.
Yeah.
So today we're not in office in a big way in the REIT. In fact, we got very, very little office. But at some point in the future, it may make sense for us to be in there. And that's, but by then I'll have all of the tools that I need in order for us to pivot to office, right? And so, so to your point, when you're thinking about dabbling into as well, I'll give you, when we made the decision to go to the REIT, we had, at the time, we probably had about 150 to 170 clients. Dude, I had a meeting face to face with about 75% of my clients in a period of about 3 months. I was having about 3 meetings a day to talk to every single investor and talk about, here's what I'm thinking about doing, on and on, and just getting enough conviction that not only through myself, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't selling myself, but also, getting it through the eyes of the investor and saying, you know what, I like the direction that you're going. Absolutely wanted to do this. And that's another way to help you pivot as well. If you're thinking about changing your business, why not talk to other people about your idea and say, you know what, I'm seeing this opportunity over here. I'm focused here. What do you think? U.S. market, right? Real estate, for instance, right? Back in 2009, right? People were getting into it, said, hey, this is a great opportunity. The market's dropped. We should get into real estate. But 2009, a lot of people got in and still ended up losing more money because the market hadn't dropped yet, right? But we also know of a lot of successful stories back, in 2011, 2012, 2013 have continued into the U.S. market and have done extremely well. But at the same time, you know what? I don't know if you're in the U.S. market, to JG, but I know you own property in Ontario, and hey, it's done well. You didn't have to focus just in the U.S. You didn't have to pivot. You stayed focused on what you were doing as well, right? So,
and so what I'm hearing, Dom, is I'm hearing, we use this phrase "all in," which is actually kind of an interesting way to explain it, because pivoting is very much like playing poker. You have 2 cards. You're shown, 3 cards. You make a decision, you put a certain amount of chips, and you see another card, then you make another decision, then you see another card, and you make your final decision. And very much like that, a pivot occurs like that. You start to make a decision, you have a certain amount of information, you get going. And then I think back to this emotionality part though, Dom, that's the most difficult component of it and that's why one of my core business beliefs in my real estate business and my marketing business at Rain and everything I touch is I believe in making data-driven decisions. I let the data guide me, and I let my gut I use my gut a lot along with that, but I let the data guide me, and I just make new decisions all the time. And I don't get emotionally involved with the decision I just made, whether it was right, whether it was wrong, whether it was the right pivot, the wrong pivot. That doesn't matter. That's back there. Yeah. Let's just keep moving forward.
But using that example about the poker, right? Your bet is going to increase, or the pivot point is going to increase the speed if your cards get better, if the opportunity is actually coming to fruition, right? So, and if it's coming to fruition quickly, then you got to pivot fast, right? Well, but if it isn't, well, dabble a little bit more, and if you're not seeing that opportunity and actually changing and really showing improvement, I'm not talking about, you know, what the potential is. I'm talking about true results. And this is another thing too, right? You know, like, we're going to pivot and we'll dabble in some areas, but at the end of the day, we can talk about, hey, we had tons of showings. We've had, you know, really a lot amount of activity on it, but how much did we rent? How much, you know, what was the end result? Like, you know, you need to have those results at the end of the day. I'll give you an example. We're looking at selling one of our, multifamily buildings, and talked to the realtor and asked, hey, how are things going? He says, wow, we've had so many interested buyers. We had so many questions about this, and that. Look, at the end of the day, I want to know, do we have an offer? You know, do we have an offer? A month has gone by. We haven't received an offer yet. We need to make a change, or we need to figure out what is not working, right? And it comes down to results. I don't care that we've had 1,000 views on the website. It doesn't mean nothing to me, because that doesn't bring in the money or the dollars or anything like that. It doesn't bring results, right? And that's one of the focuses that I have in terms of when I'm making a decision pivoting. It comes down to the results. And it's got to happen fast. And if it's not changing, it's not moving, then you got to figure out what it is that you need to do to change it to make it.
Dom, there are some REIN members here, and there are some people in our community that have properties that got to make a decision on whether they're going to pivot. You know, I give you a perfect example, and I know you've done this, so I want to talk about that. But I had a property right before COVID. I had built a series of properties ready to go into the short-term rental market. And you know, Airbnb was mandated to shut down. So we immediately had to make a pivoting decision whether we were going to hold on and stay empty for who knows how long, or if we were going to change our business model to a medium-term rental or to a long-term rental. And we made the decision we made, which was a great decision. But people are in these situations where they have to make these decisions. How has this played out for you, Dom? I know you've had to make some calls on certain spaces you own, rent, lease. What have you done, and what's been the result?
100%. Look, at the end of the day, COVID took everyone by surprise. You know, there's just conspiracies out there, and the future will tell if these conspiracies will come through. But at the end of the day, it's affected everyone, good or bad, and it's affected everyone. For us, what was one of the first things, people thought about? Oh my gosh, you know what? Office is dead. People are all going to work from home. No one wants to go to the office. In fact, you know what? I worked from home for 3 weeks. I kind of liked it. I kind of enjoyed it. And, I was getting things done at home, going to Costco when I needed to and doing all that sort of stuff. But, after 3 weeks, I had to have a quick reflection and going, this is great, but I can tell my productivity is also going down. So because of all the distractions that exist with that, but that's just a personal standpoint. But, what was the first reaction to that? Office is dead. Everybody wants to work from home. And the reality is that while people love working from home, I think we all recognize that we all need a balance. And there's lots of conversations online right now about where office is going to go. It seems the consensus is there's going to be some sort of hybrid solution to office. You'll have employers allowing for people to work from home a few days of the week and then coming into the office a few days a week. It'll change the landscape a little bit, but it's not over. So for us, we had office space where we're renting to different businesses and taking big chunks of space. But recognizing what happened with COVID, what ends up happening in a situation like this is a lot of people now are afraid to make commitments with long-term leases. They don't want to commit to a large space. They don't want, right? They don't want to pay money for space that they're not going to use, on and on and on. And so we created a business center in this office building that we bought, and it's called the Britannia Business Center. And the Britannia Business Center offers an opportunity for, the accountant or that financial advisor who just needs a private office just for himself, to allow clients to come in. Doesn't have to. There's no long-term lease. It's very, very flexible. You pay one price and it includes everything. And so what people need right now is to have that option to say, you know what, my business is not working right now, or I want to have the option to say, to move out if I have to, and not be committed in this long-term lease. And so that's one of the changes and one of the pivots we've had to make, and we're being very successful at it. We're online, and it's amazing how many businesses that are out there. I'll tell you, we had a group come in yesterday, a technology company, and there are 3 people. And I thought, great, you know what? We'll sell a space of about 400 square feet. They want nothing with it. They want to take just a small private office of 135 square feet. 3 people in 135 square feet. If you look online, or if you look up as to generally the amount of space per employee, the amount of space per employee is about 300 square feet. It's since come down to like 200, 220. These people are going to have 3 people in 135 square feet, right? But hey, if that works for them, that works. You know what? The risk is not there. They're also pivoting as well. They want to make sure that, we're not going to make a huge commitment, but you know what? We have enough space to allow the flexibility for us to grow our business. And we also have the option to either grow or reduce our size or whatever the case may be. And that's why we created the Business Center.
Well, so see, that sounds like an amazing pivot. And it also, in line with what we've been saying, Dom, is, you didn't take everything you own and flip it over to this kind of business model. You started with one space, and you're tasting and you're testing and you're seeing how well it works, and it's been phenomenal, and you're going to be sold out soon and all the various things. But then you can decide whether you're going to go all in some more and bet some extra chips on that or not. And that's
absolutely.
See, and that control, you see, people, I think people, when they think pivot, they largely think they're not in control. But in fact, folks, I want you to recognize from Dom's examples here and what he's saying, you're in 100% control at all times. You're deciding how much you're pivoting, how fast you're turning the dial, how much you're going all in. And at every step of the way, you should have evidence to continue to point you in the direction of your pivot or not the pivot. If you don't have that, Dom, I would say you're actually guessing or speculating at that point.
I would suspect that some of the viewers out there never even bought a real estate property or thinking about buying a real estate property, right? And you have a job, and you say, well, how am I going to do this? Well, you know what the reality is most of us started with a job already. So you dabbled a little bit in real estate, got to learn a little bit about that. Here's where where pivoting and sometimes risk and taking chances or an all-in situation becomes a problem is you decide to quit your job and get into real estate and you haven't bought your first real estate property. Or you decide, you know what, I don't know anything about real estate. I'm going to go buy a big commercial building. Well, guess what? You're going to learn quickly. All right, where your deficiencies lie, right? And hopefully you bought right, but you don't need to. You know what? If you there's so many things like RAIN and educational resources that are out there for you to learn how to do that. But even if you didn't have that, you could still go out and buy a revenue property as long as you keep your job. Now, just, so you can make that pivot. And if it works really well and you figure out what you're really good at in the aspect of running a business like real estate, then you start making that point as to when do I make a pivot into doing this full time versus, maybe you don't need to pivot. Maybe you can have both. And there's JG, there's a lot of successful people who still have their jobs and own a ton of real estate, right? Sure. Because they've set up their business so that they can allow them to do that.
So, Dom, have you also seen, I would imagine at this time, there's also some people that have decided that the pivot they're going to take is they're going to say, you know what, I'm just going to take my foot off the gas. I'm going to sell some properties. I'm going to get a little bit more liquid. I'm going to cool it down. I might invest in something like Invest Plus as a REIT. I'm just going to park my cash there for 2-3 years. I'm going to let this COVID thing kind of settle down. Are you seeing that as well, Dom? I would imagine that's a pivot taking place.
a lot of the conversations we're having today are with investors who are either already in real estate and want to leverage their RSPs that they can't use in their own, with, you know, they can't buy their own real estate with their own RSPs. We're having lots of conversations with investors who are just, you know, taking note of the growth that we've had, you know, through the last 6 months. I mean, we've grown the company by 56% here in the last 6 months. It's been,
Wow.
for us, you know, we've had a tremendous year, and the trajectory is still on course for us to grow the company substantially by the end of the year. And so a lot of investors are saying, you know what, like part of the pivot is also just making a decision about being in real estate, and it doesn't mean that you have to own your own real estate. You know, when I started, I didn't know anything about real estate. You know, I graduated as an engineer. I was working at the job that I was in. I loved what I was doing. I just wanted to get into it. So, you know what? I decided to partner up or invest with someone who already was doing everything for me. And I just wanted to make sure the philosophy and the people who are behind the business are people that I can trust and work with. And that's all that matters to me. So we're seeing a lot more of that, of people getting into you know, getting into REITs, getting something a little bit more stable, also given with all the market that's been going on too, right? So that's part of the pivoting there. Geez, there's so many pivots, you know, as we're talking about, there's so many places you know, and pivoting and making a decision, those are, you know, making a decision to pivot is sort of your first step, and then the decision to actually pivot, you know, after you have all that information in front of you, then there's that. And you got to make sure that if you decide that you're not going to pivot, then at least make the decision that you're not going to, at least, and then you got to live with that, and hopefully it's a good one, right? So anyways.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Dom, this has been absolutely fantastic. I hope everyone's appreciated the pivot conversation. I think it's critical. I think there's a ton of people asking themselves these questions now. I think you gave a real clear sort of, you know, step-by-step instruction on how to start this pivoting process. And yeah, the last thing kind of end on, Dom, is, you know, pivoting isn't forever. If you pivot in the wrong direction, good news, you can undo it. You know, it doesn't have to be forever, and it doesn't have to be permanent, does it?
No, and not at all. And everything that you do, right? I mean, everything, no matter how bad of a decision you make, can always be fixed. And then it's time and money are probably the two things, and maybe some emotional scars that you're going to get from that. But all of those things, you come back, you know, and we all have emotional scars. Geez, you know, JG, you're pretty successful, and I hear about the success that you have, but I'm willing to bet there were some failures there as well, right? But those are all of the building blocks that allowed you to be where you are today, right? So but you made the decision that you've pivoted, right?
Yeah, I'll pass along the contact information of my therapist. She'll tell you about all the emotional
right. I know.
They're so deep, I'm still working through them all.
No kidding. We think, you know, that's right. Part of making money is having some money for some therapy as well.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But this, you know, you know, in all seriousness, at the end of the day, it was because of all of the failures. When I combine all of the failures that I've had in the past, is allowed me to be where I am today. And there were some pretty bad failures, and there were some, you know, some just, you know, experiences that you know that didn't destroy what I had, or didn't really affect me nearly as much as I thought it would. At the end of the day, you know, stay the course. You make the decisions. Listen to your gut, which you talked about too, right? Which is a huge one, right? I mean, and your gut tells you so much, but for the love of God, make a decision, right? Make a decision one way or the other, right?
Awesome. Love it. Dominic, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it. Great job. And we'll see you very soon at the REIN member meetings.